welcome to another episode of Movie Schmovie, where we talk about movies and stuff like those things. I'm Steve.
I'm John.
I'm Ron.
And we've gotten together tonight for a special episode. We were all fortunate enough to see a big film coming out today. It's a 21st film in the Marvel MCU, and Captain Marvel. So we kind of wanted to get together and try to get this podcast out today. So we were perfectly timed up with this movie coming out in the theaters. Probably, no doubt the biggest film so far released this year. So I'm sure a lot of people will be seeing this movie. So, of course, we wanted to get together and talk about what we thought of it. I think we'll probably keep it mostly spoiler-free, I think. I don't know what you guys have planned.
I plan on keeping it pretty spoiler-free on my end.
I think spoiler-free with a warning towards some chance to talk about a few of the of the surprises. But yes, much of this conversation can be kept spoiler-free because we can put it in perspective with the other Marvel films and talk about what this movie's trying to do without really ruining the plot for folks.
Right. Okay, cool. Yeah, that's good. The 21st film in the whole MCU coming out. This is the precursor to what I guess is the end. So I guess I'm curious, like, Is Endgame the end of Phase 3, or has Phase 4 already started?
I'm a little unclear on the numbering of the phases, but I do believe that Endgame represents the culmination of something they've been building up to. Really, Spider-Man Far From Home, which comes out in July, is the last movie that they've really put on the calendar definitively that we've seen any kind of material for. So I kind of feel like this is like the closing down of an era. But as far as where the phases begin and end, I feel like I lost track of that somewhere around Phase 2.
My understanding is the new Spider-Man's the beginning of Phase 4.
Okay.
That's what I have come to believe.
That's what you were told.
Yeah.
That's what Kevin Feige told you?
Name your sources.
Oh, no. I definitely didn't find out definitely didn't know through Kevin Feige, the Marvel Wiki.
You mean when you gave him his hat back, he let you know that little piece of information?
When I said, man, maybe you should hang in the background for a little bit when we had that conversation. Is when we talked about the phases.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess the reason I ask it is only because, like, what John was just kind of saying, like, without having much else kind of officially announced or, like, really, I mean, you kind of know things are happening behind the scenes. They've announced production of other stuff, but, like, without really seeing, like, that crazy roadmap that they kind of laid out years back of, giving us a taste of what was coming up to where we are now. It just seems like a really interesting moment in the MCU, for all the characters that we've, been, falling in love with over the past, 21 films, and, new characters that are being introduced through this film, for example, and, with the Disney Fox merger coming up or happening, what they're going to do in that on that playground, that sandbox is really interesting to see what they do from here out. And, I was reading an article the other day, like, or it was a podcast maybe, where they were actually talking to Kevin Feige, and, like, I think that, that bold thing that happened, a couple years back, like, where they did announce, like, the next, like, 3 or 4 years of movies. I mean, he was, like, making a comment that was kind of not a mistake, but not something that he would ever see them doing again. Just, I guess, because at the moment that happens, a lot of the expectations for those films have already started without really giving them over to someone that can, create something with that film, or, people start speculating and people start saying what it should be, what it shouldn't be, where that kind of, I don't know, I guess in some ways, like, it could set a movie back before a creator or a director or a writer or whatever, really gets their hands on it and, has a saying in what it is going to be from their perspective.
I think that could have been a big contributor to that sense of fatigue that people talked about too, because you weren't just going to see 1 or 2 or 3 movies in a year. You also knew the next 8 or 9 movies that were coming. And I think that people started talking about that, like, oh my God, can you believe there's going to be so many of these movies? And the truth is, they've done 3 a year for a couple of years. And that hasn't tired me out, because again, I think we all agreed that at some point we accepted this is the Marvel TV show, and we like to go see the latest episode in the movie theater.
Right.
And the movies do make themselves distinct, but that idea of fatigue was so theoretical, because meanwhile DC was doing the same thing and announcing their big slate, and it just seemed like, what are you guys doing? And then the Universal monsters, remember they announced their slate. So I kind of feel like Marvel, I heard Kevin Feige say something similar where he almost said that was something that we felt we needed to do at that time to explain to fans what was coming and which characters were going to get rolled in, but that now they're established and they really don't need to give you that much of a preview. I would say that they've shown with the marketing for Endgame thus far, and Captain Marvel too, the movie we're talking about today, they also have shown that they don't really have to reveal that much in the marketing either. So it's almost like this idea of closing things down and not saturating you with all the information. It almost seems like it's a very targeted thing to do at this point in the sort of the life of this franchise, because at that time, it did kind of seem like, wow, they've got all, it almost is boring in a weird way to know that far out what's going to happen versus having the sense of mystery that you might be able to suddenly see a trailer one day and go, what? So I think it buys them a certain element of surprise, and it feels less like a giant lumbering beast and feels more like they can make interesting movies. But again, I bet they'll still stick to their style, and I think that everything we've seen before, we know there's another Doctor Strange coming. There's probably another Ant-Man. It's not like they've wiped the slate. Before we get too deep into talking about Captain Marvel, I want you to explain what I'm now calling Ronald's analogy of the fourth chipmunk. I just want to... I want you to explain your analogy of prequels and the introduction of Captain Marvel, because a big topic for us is probably going to be this introduction of this character who's clearly intended to be important.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, this all came to context because we were talking about kind of the schedule of the movies and what's happened in Infinity War, the first Avengers, is kind of the implications of the war and the hint that the most powerful superhero is someone we've never seen in the 10 plus years in this universe. So my comparison was basically that if Alvin and the Chipmunks on season 3 added a fourth chipmunk named Samson, and Samson were to just show up out of the blue and they just acted like nothing happened. I think Samson is essentially Captain Marvel. It is. I don't know if it's not a bad thing. It's just, I think that in people's fandom, they kind of ignore the absurdity of what has happened. And I think that what's happened is, so here's another thing to add to the chipmunk theory. I think what seems like a very well thought out thing to not tell us about Phase 4 is is not as thought out as people may think. It has to do with the big elephant in the room, which is all of the acquisitions that they've made, which they knew was going to happen for quite some time. And going ahead and naming, okay, so Fantastic Four is going to come out in 2021, or a new X-Men movie is going to come out, would be a little crazy for them to do at this point, because these are characters that also are like Samson or Captain Marvel, going to be added in the third or fourth season of the situation. So I'm super curious about how you guys feel about it. I'm not saying that what they did was sloppy or messy or anything like that, but something about it feels a little strange that they just plopped it in our laps and we're supposed to be okay with it without questioning it on any level. So that's all.
You were voicing that before you saw the movie, so I was actually wondering, how did you feel? Do you feel like this was a Samson the Chipmunk situation, or do you think this was something a little different, or did it work for you that they introduced her the way they did?
Okay, well, I guess that's kind of the introduction of my opinion. So, I mean, I came in kind of hesitant, to be honest, because as we discussed, the trailer run of this movie, the promotion of this run has been kind of dry. And introducing Samson didn't seem like a really good idea from the trailers. But bringing Samson in after I see this movie, I can honestly say that given how messy this was, Marvel did an incredible job of cleaning up that room after all the spatter that Samson made from the cookie batter. I think there's something about this movie that feels a lot more... This feels a lot like it's in the vein of Doctor Strange and Ant-Man, even Thor Ragnarok, in the way that it's a little outside of the main story, but still serving it at the same time.
I would throw Black Panther in there too as a movie that, like, all those movies that you mentioned are sort of like origin stories where the movie got to be its own thing.
Right, and still serving a story.
I think figuring out what its own thing was while watching this movie, it took me a little while into the movie before I felt like I kind of get what this is doing. And then I feel like it just got better and better and more enjoyable for me. But I had that same feeling, Ronald, of trepidation almost, of is this going to be a Marvel movie that doesn't quite click for me, based purely on the fact that nothing from the trailers like set my heart on fire, except for the fact that I was excited to see Brie Larson in this role. But that was all like stuff on paper. It wasn't anything I had really seen yet.
Right.
How do you feel, Steve?
I think it suffers only because of where it comes in the MCU. I think, like, you mentioning, I mean, mainly the most relevant one is Black Panther. The way that character was introduced, and, like, it, as a monumental character in the MCU, in movie history, and in anything having to do with pop culture, was a historic thing. And I think that the way they did it, where, Black Panther was in Civil War, then he got his own film, and then he had a large role in Infinity War. I almost feel like I mean, they sort of tried to do that a little bit with Captain Marvel by, like, at least like kind of nodding to her at the end of Infinity War, like with the pager. But I mean, I don't know. I guess I came away a little bit disappointed in really stressing the importance of her character in the whole MCU, not just in this movie. Like, as a standalone movie, I feel differently. But I mean, I feel like, they introduce a strong female lead, that is kind of, the story is kind of told in an interesting way, like, through the flashbacks, through the flashes of memory, and, like, she doesn't remember really who she is or where she comes from. And that stuff kind of works for the most part for me. But I think the whole idea of, like, explaining how big of a role she's going to have in, not only Endgame, but whatever is to come in the Marvel films, I don't know that I came away from the movie feeling like I truly felt how huge her character was.
I get that.
I walked away from the movie seeing how powerful she was, but not so much understanding, I guess getting a sense of, like, her coming before most of these Avengers, and, even, little winks and nods to, Easter eggs in the film that kind of catch up to where the movies are now currently, in the timeline. But I don't know. I the more it sat with me, and, like, and we didn't really get to talk a whole lot after we saw it in theater. Like, the more it sits with me, and I kind of, like, write out what I'm talking or what I'm feeling about it. I don't know. There's a lot more that I was bothered by. Not to get into our feelings about the movie overall, but just specifically about what you're talking about in terms of, introducing this character that is really intended to be the lead, or a, like, two lead in, like, what's coming for the MCU. And I don't know.
Don't you wonder how important she really can be, though, in a movie that has all those other characters kind of jostling for screen time and some people going out? It's like, I could see her being extremely important, but that could mean she has a role similar to one of the few characters who got an arc in the first part. Do you know what I'm saying? So it might mean she's part of the team, because I just don't think it would be very satisfying, and I think they know it wouldn't be satisfying if she is somehow the secret weapon that conquers Thanos. I think she can be a big part of it.
Yeah.
And I think that the fact that she'll be added to things is going to be a bonus, but I think they're smart enough to know, just like I know they know it won't be satisfying if someone just gets the Infinity Gauntlet on and snaps their fingers and puts everything back. Like, they know there has to be some other way of fixing this. I feel like Captain Marvel can be part of that plan, but maybe similar to the way Superman, not to say that Justice League juggled all the characters that well, but the way that Superman can be amongst characters that aren't as powerful as him and still not be the only player that matters.
Of course.
I don't feel like they're going to suddenly say, okay, there's this Deus Ex Machina, here's this character who comes in the end and saves the day. That just doesn't feel like what they've been building towards. What I see them doing more is, like, springboarding her into, like, the importance she might have going forward, and especially with the idea that she's got this 25-year span of cosmic adventures that we don't know anything about. which allows you to reuse characters from Guardians. So yeah, it gives you an opportunity to do this whole pocket of stuff that is out there in space, and as you mentioned, Ronald, is very different and kind of odd and kind of out there in its own world, and it's a stylistic thing you really have to accept, that they really jump in with the kind of cosmic fantasy feel at the beginning of this. It's very far-flung, and there's a lot of like planet names and you know what I mean, aliens and stuff that gets thrown at you. So they're clearly setting up something that can be expanded on. But as far as the character, yeah, I wondered the same thing, Steve, is like if there was anything that didn't quite sit well with me, it would be that idea of like, is she really going to be the key?
Given the circumstances of a messy situation and throwing someone in as quickly as they did, it's the best version of it. This is the equivalent of like the way Justice League was thrown together, the way that they put something together in a really short amount of time, and that's the way that it turned out. I guess that's the accomplishment that I'm giving it. Mm-hmm. I personally, I have to be completely honest, I like this movie a little more than Infinity War just because there was a story beyond just the combat of it. And I'm hoping that that Endgame has a more complete thing, because there's a lot more going on in the second film versus the first film, that leads up to whatever happens with Captain Marvel. And like John was saying, I don't think that she's gonna be the savior of the movie. I do think that she's gonna have a big role though. But as an origin story, I thought that it was. I've never seen a superhero movie like it. I've never seen anything like it. The use of these flashbacks was done in a way that I just haven't seen before. So I don't know. I overall I thought it was a pretty decent movie.
So just on a baseline, like I like the movie.
Okay.
Feel like
cool.
I feel like a lot of things work in the film. The things that I do find issue with, I don't know really what to like attribute those shortcomings to. Like I don't know that I walked away like really just being blown away by Brie Larson's performance. Like there are moments in the movie where I really feel like I felt like a star on the screen and like a character that I want to see like for years to come. But then like a minute or two later, there would be like a really weird sequence where like I would completely lose that character, or really where that character's story was and why the interest is there. But I mean, I don't know if that's her, or I don't know if it's the script or the direction. I mean, I think the big takeaway for me with this film was that like I feel like the last few films and the last few like characters that they have had their standalone films, I personally felt like this movie didn't feel like it had a voice like those films did to me. I felt like this movie felt more like a straight up like action adventure superhero movie. I didn't come away kind of feeling like I don't know, I guess like that subgenre that a lot of these films kind of pull out, like whether it was, like the cosmic thing that Guardians did, or like, the caper thing that Ant-Man did, or the kind of the buddy comedy that Thor Ragnarok already did.
You know why I think that is, Steve? Is I think because the 90s, this movie is going in for that kind of 90s action, that big action style. Like that jet roaring across a canyon and it's shooting at an alien spaceship. That felt very 90s to me. Some of the action, the fighting, some of that fighting scenes were really incoherent, and then some of them were really kind of cool, and I got kind of lost in a few of them. But what I'm saying is I think the reason why it doesn't stand out as a genre piece or a subgenre piece, like what you were saying, is because that doesn't feel distant enough from what they're already doing in these movies. The kind of militaristic look, which is another kind of 90s action trope, is something they've already done with Captain America, and the fight style. So I feel like it just didn't feel different enough from things they've done before. But I did see the ways, particularly you mentioned a buddy comedy. I think they were going explicitly for a kind of mismatched buddy comedy between her and Nick Fury, played by a very digitally de-aged Samuel L. Jackson.
Sure.
That worked because it didn't look weird. It didn't look too weird just watching him talk, but it was weird looking at him and going, that's not what Samuel L. Jackson looked like 25 years ago. You know what I mean?
Right.
But it didn't look wrong. It didn't have that squishy face look that it often can when they do that de-aging. So I didn't think it looked as good on Clark Gregg as Agent Coulson. That wasn't as convincing. They did something odd with his hair or something that didn't quite work. But the de-aging wasn't too conspicuous, considering that pretty much he's in the whole movie. I kind of enjoyed the chemistry between them at times. I thought there were times where it really clicked, and then there were times where it was a little forced, and that they were going for some of those laugh lines that the audience seemed to go for. But I don't know, maybe that was a screening crowd that was really excited about the movie. But there were some moments that really worked for me, and I remember I was kind of smiling at certain bits. It felt nice to see Samuel L. Jackson play a kind of lighthearted character somehow. I didn't really expect that to be the way that went.
I mean, I just feel like, I don't know, I guess the overall sense is that, like, I didn't come away feeling like it was as special as I thought it was going to feel. And, you know, for so many reasons, like what we've already talked about in terms of, you know, even if she is not the key in Endgame, like, she's going to be a major force to reckon with in terms of the films and the box office and, you know, what they are going to do in terms of their brand for the next, you know, decade probably. And, you know, I didn't come away from it feeling like, you know, this was like a special moment. And you know, and that's not even saying like, oh, it's the first female Marvel movie, like female-led superhero Marvel movie. I didn't come away feeling like they really gave this movie that voice or that like event feel that I thought it would have. And maybe that's not fair because I'm comparing it to something like Black Panther, which, like I said earlier, truly felt like monumental. Like it's you know, it's insane. Like, to compare those two, to me, I don't know how you compare them. I don't feel like, you know, you're talking about, you know, murky action scenes, and I mean, if you know, the jets shooting through the mountains, shooting at spaceships, like all that stuff to me felt like generic, like, you know, even like some of the fight sequences like in Solo, you know, flying like spaceships through the mountains, and like that stuff looked better in that film recently, I mean. But I don't know, like I guess I get what you're saying about, like, you know, not having that special whatever genre or like the voice that I'm trying to describe, but I just kind of, I don't know, I guess I just felt like I expected this movie for like what Marvel has done for some of the other characters that maybe don't hold as strong of a foothold on the brand as she is going to. I didn't feel like I walked away just completely knocked out like I had hoped. And, you know, and that goes for some of the action sequences. I feel like some of the storyline itself is a little murky now that I think more about it. And like I said earlier, just like having a full understanding of her powers and this, you know, the scope of them and really what they are and where they came from, I kind of feel like it doesn't really, you know, with the exception of a pretty cool sequence where you see like literally how she gets her powers, like that's a pretty great sequence. I did like that a lot. But I mean, I don't feel like, in, you know, a general audience member that doesn't know the comic source material would fully understand what she's capable of. Like a lot of other characters, they kind of do a good job of kind of showing that.
I don't think I know what she's capable of. Like I spent that whole first part of the movie wondering if I'd missed
Same here.
a couple of lines of dialogue would have made it make more sense. And then as it went on, I thought, anyway, I picked up on how they were setting that up with the idea that she's got this fractured memory. It's interesting that you're pointing to the generic aspect of it, because I had accepted when they said, oh, we're kind of emulating 90s action movies. In my mind, I thought, isn't that just going to look like a kind of generic action movie? I may have even said that when we were talking about it on the show.
You did.
And then seeing the trailer, it did seem generic. You know, people called it like Superhero the Movie or whatever. And I think that lowered my expectations to a certain extent, to the point where I was able to be surprised and kind of impressed with how the movie did build some of these relationships. And at the end of the movie, I'm not going to say anything too spoilery at this point, but at the end of the movie, there are some character turns that lead to this little ad hoc family of interesting characters that is sort of like a special thing within the Marvel world that they've set up a couple things that are interesting. But I know what you mean. It's like the movie itself does not feel that noteworthy outside of just being another entry in this world. And there's plenty to chew on in terms of how this story fits into this world. But I was going to ask you guys, like, would we be doing an episode about this movie if it were just a disconnected superhero movie?
No.
Would we be doing a day and date episode about this?
No. No, I knew what you were gonna ask. Oh. So I have a theory. Are you ready for my theory? So I think that everything that happened with Black Panther and its bigness and what it represented, I think that it was almost a knee-jerk reaction to not try to overshadow or shit on that may have explained the way this was presented. It's almost like they went to a group of liberals and did like a case study. They were like, so what do you think about this? How should we market this?
Would this line work better than this line if
Right.
really push for like this?
And here's what I think happened. They were like, since Black Panther came out, we can't really celebrate a white woman being the first superhero quite as much as we would have 10 years ago. So let's celebrate it in a cool way, but not outright say, hey, this is the first women's Marvel. You know what I mean? Because of the barriers that Black Panther broke down. All I'm saying is the marketing was weird, and I think that some of it had to do with how they wanted to present this idea. I don't think it's all related to race. That's not what I mean. It's just the idea of somebody in their mind thinking that the idea of presenting this in a way could seem problematic.
It's interesting how the pre-backlash to this movie that was based around all the usual sort of troll man-children that think that because a movie has a female lead that it's shoving a feminist agenda down your throat.
Right.
And because Brie Larson said some very pointed things about wanting to make sure that the junket that she would go on, she was going to do only a junket that had been organized to be as diverse as possible because she sees a lot of white male critics a lot, and it's a lot of guys with beards, guilty of sitting there asking these questions, and I thought that sounded like such a natural way for her to use her status, to push things forward, that I was shocked once again at the man babies getting all sad about how they have to make room for other voices. It was ridiculous. And I think that kind of builds up this desire for this movie to do really well. And there was the Rotten Tomatoes situation with the review bombing, which isn't really a review bombing. It's a want to see rating that they used to list as a %, and now they're going to list as a number to take away the stigma of that being like some kind of grade for the movie. So you'll now see the number of people that have said they want to see the movie instead of the %. And, I guess that makes sense. But it is interesting that Rotten Tomatoes has claimed that they were going to change their policy, but they seem to have changed their policy kind of around the way this movie and Last Jedi were treated by that type of troll campaign. Yeah. So it is interesting that this movie came it's not even out as we speak of it, and there's already been this story of how Rotten Tomatoes is changing its policies. So I do know what you're saying, Ronald, about how they didn't like push forward the political aspect of it, but I do think in the marketing throughout there were these little buzzwords and things that were meant to kind of emphasize that aspect, and I do think they kind of seemed like they were trying to be quiet about it in a strange way. I haven't seen a ton of merchandising and marketing for this movie, but I guess I don't remember how much did I see for Doctor Strange. How much did I see for some of these in between origin films?
But that's the thing I think I'm trying to get at, is that that's not what this film is, or should have been, or I mean everything that anyone has ever said or even viewed this as being, like, this is the first of 21 films that they've put out that has a female lead. Like, it shouldn't be that. Like, it should be something special. Like, I'm not saying make it special.
No, I know what you're saying.
That it's like suffering for it. I mean, I just mean, and I mean, you may be onto something, Ron. I don't know if that's the case, but I mean, but as you described, like what Black Panther was, I feel like on a similar wavelength, but in a different way, this film, I think should have been. I mean, I say that because I'm sure that some people will watch this and they'll feel that it is that film, and I hope that's a lot of people and the majority of people. And maybe and I did want to say, like, I kind of feel like if I see it again, I have a feeling that it's going to probably improve in my view, like, only because, like you were saying, John, those trailers kind of got you with a little bit of a lowered expectation. And while I thought the trailers were not good, like in the last couple of weeks, I really like ramped up getting pumped for like what this movie was going to be, for all the reasons that I'm describing and that the three of us have talked about so far. But I mean, I don't know. I just think that, I don't know. It's just weird. I'm very curious to see like how it holds over once it opens, and I'm sure it's gonna be huge. But I mean, there's a chance that I feel like it's not gonna be as huge as they think it's gonna be.
I've felt that. I felt that all along. I felt that this movie, just based on the trailers themselves, that like most people were going to see this if they were excited about it. Most people, it was because of the brand and maybe because of the cast.
Right.
And what you were saying about, I mean, again, there's this issue with I don't want to harp on the performance at the heart of this, but I do think that maybe if there is something missing, it might be that actor just inhabiting a role and just making it so dynamic and making it so iconic.
Agreed.
But I don't know. I mean, it's possible for good actors to get overwhelmed by the machinery of this type of film. You didn't really say much of what you thought of the performances in the movie, Ronald. What did you think about it from an acting standpoint?
Bree was a lot more interesting in it than I thought she would be. I mean, I thought there were some cool things about the relationship with her friend that I thought there was some interesting hints about some stuff that I was like, man, this is interesting with the chemistry between these two characters. I thought that was cool. Bree in general, the problem with this is that we just watched a movie just last year with a cast of super charismatic women in Black Panther.
Right.
And to go from that level of charisma to what Brie offered, and even stuff that's Black Widow offers, and her performance sometimes, man, feels a little like we've been shorted in that way.
Yeah.
And I couldn't help but leave out of the movie like, man, I would have loved to see a Shuri spinoff movie. I wonder what a Black Widow movie would be like. I wonder if they bet on the wrong horse. That's really what I've been thinking, man. Like, should this have been the first women's superhero that Marvel introduced? Specifically since Wonder Woman did what it did.
But Gal Gadot is not like a great actress.
No,
we do all think that Brie Larson is a pretty solid to great actress. So it's don't we? I think we all do, right? We've seen her be great in some things.
I think she's
so
great.
it is a little bit odd that that's a question that we're having right now, because I say that as a big fan of hers and as someone who did enjoy a lot of her performance in this. But I do think the stiffness of some of those moments, it may have been a deliberate character thing, but I don't know. I'm trying to think of an analogy in the whole Marvel setup, and I can say that maybe early on, before they let Chris Hemsworth be funny, Thor had some of that feel.
Yeah.
And I can kind of remember, and maybe not so much in any of the Captain America movies, but in the first Avengers movie, I kind of remember Chris Evans kind of having to stand there like a doof sometimes, because Joss Whedon was making him the sport of Tony Stark's wit or whatever. Yeah. So it's like, I do remember moments where there's like awkward bits of acting from people who otherwise can be very charismatic. But it's not a lot. A lot of these actors, if the one thing they've done, and I guess we've said that all along, is they've cast these people who instantly charm you into buying into this half-baked comic book fantasy stuff that has always been in the Marvel comics about the characters, and the other stuff is not secondary to the characters, but it kind of is a growth out of the characters. The storylines always are based on the characters. So I don't know. I remember feeling like Benedict Cumberbatch. I was worried about him and thinking he was kind of stiff, and that performance is a little awkward at times. But I don't remember it, as the movie ended, having the same kind of concerns about it, about wondering, like, was Brie Larson just not in her element or something? But I hate to say that, because I'm not an actor, and I'm not, she's amazing. So, like, if we're talking about why this character feels, ambiguous, it might be because of the acting.
I think one thing that like kind of took away from it was like, when I think about the character in the film, like when I was saying earlier, I don't know if it's Brie or if it's like the story, the script, the direction. But I mean, one thing in her favor, like, that makes me not completely write off that maybe it's her, is that I feel like the more I think about her backstory in the film, I just feel like everything that we're given about the backstory is almost like an afterthought, or it's complete exposition. It's not anything that's happening or that she's feeling that is really causing me to have any sort of emotional attachment or just any emotional depth to her character. Like it's either, Jude Law telling her something, or her friend telling her something, or the daughter of the friend telling her something, or we see it quickly in an audio flashback or whatever it is. But I think that like really kind of not being able to feel her experience with any of that stuff, but only really kind of feel her reaction to it as she learns it, I don't think it connects. Or I didn't feel a connection when she finds these things out, or when she's piecing this puzzle together. That like, for example, one thing I was thinking about today was like talking about telling stories in flashbacks or from a main character who has no memory. I think about The Bourne Identity, and I think about the idea of telling that story from a main character who remembers nothing, but then through the story, he experiences things that he reacts to and that we feel him learning things. Like when he catches, or there's like a fight sequence where like he grabs like something like I don't know if it was like the magazine or something he grabs as somebody's trying to hit him, or the flashlight. He like immediately knows what to do with it out of nowhere. Like he doesn't understand it, but he's learning something about it.
Right.
And I think like in that film, it's different in a positive way. Like where like, as we learn about his story, we're learning about it with him, and we're learning about it through like things that he's figuring out or that he's learning himself, not things that are being told to him or that the audience is seeing in a flashback as he's seeing it just flash before his eyes, but not really knowing what he's seeing.
Yeah, Steve, that's a great observation, because I do think those moments played like a little puzzle that was being put together for you across the movie, but they did not play as like moments for the character of Captain Marvel or
exactly
Carol, as we know her. She's also known as Veers for the big first chunk of the movie. I don't want to tip too many people off to that, but that idea that like you do think about the scenes where people are sitting. I mean, I do think some of those scenes actually were acted well and had an intimacy to them, but I also agree with you that it's strange that those big moments were played as like watching someone explain something to her, as opposed to really feeling her go through those things, even though they did show us certain key moments. And I do agree with you, Steve, that the flashback where she got the where we see how she got her powers, so to speak.
Yeah.
I thought that was interestingly shot. That action was some of the action shots were kind of artfully done, and that was one.
Yeah. That one stands out.
Yeah. The whole through line of her having being emotional, I didn't gather that at all. Like it felt like, remember in Suicide Squad where they were describing all the people and they never showed them being badasses and doing terrible things? Like, these guys are terrible. They're ferocious. They kill people on sight, and you never see it happen.
Right.
That was the same thing about her emotions. I never saw a scene that I wouldn't have done something that she did. I wasn't like, oh my God, she should not have knocked the wall out of that. She never did anything like that. So it felt like the way that I guess the whole thing, maybe it's a metaphor or a direct comparison to when women have reactions to things in general, and somebody's like, hey, take it easy. Ooh.
And somebody like gaslights them into thinking that their emotions are extreme or something, instead of just a natural reaction. I think that was definitely there, but I also thought that was at least written in a way that you could believe that was a mentor giving you some kind of Jedi-like training to say, deny your feelings. I thought that was decently done, but I didn't even think about the fact that there isn't a huge payoff for that, except for the fact that and I was going to get to this when you were talking about, Steve, some of the sort of plot beats concerning her didn't work because of that exposition issue. But I do think what did work for me, and what did kind of had me smiling more and more as the movie was going along towards the end, was the little relationships that are formed. And I do think they show her as distinct from some of the other heroes in the way that she's got that Superman, Captain America wanting to do what's right thing. And she also sort of goes back and makes sure that she's kind of redeeming herself when she finds out some information late in the movie that changes the context of what she's been doing.
Right.
And she does something pretty big to sort of repay this grievance. I don't know how to talk about it without talking about it. But also, I think there's an idea of she's not out to kill the bad guy. She's not out to destroy everything. She's not out to have this war go on. I think those are subtle ways that they may be connected back to that idea about emotions and compassion being a thing that is part of her character. She took on this role of kind of saying, all right, I'm the leader of this, and I'm going to help these people who I wronged.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to come down on it too hard, because I mean, like, I said at the jump of this episode, like, I did overall enjoy the film, and I did like it. I think it's just a management of expectations for the movie as itself, and the movie in the scope of the MCU, and the movie as their first female superhero film. So it's like a management for all three of those things for me, that I don't know, that those three, expectations were met as high as I hoped it would, the way they really allowed Black Panther to be the movie that it is, and it will it's a forever movie, like that is. And I don't know if this film is that.
It's weird that it's got like an underdog quality to it, which I didn't expect.
It's very weird. It is. You're right. I did want to kind of point out one sequence, which with no spoilers involved. When I mentioned earlier that Anna Bode and Ryan Fleck, who directed the film, I kind of was expecting a little more of their personal touch in that. They're really kind of well known for like these indie dramas, like really great character films, like mainly like Half Nelson is the one that most people know, with Ryan Gosling. But there is a sequence in the film when they're at Maria's farmhouse where there's a bunch of characters outside talking, and that sequence in the film is a standout to me, like where I felt that touch that I thought would be brought throughout more of the film, of characters kind of talking that isn't just exposition. There is some, but there's really a lot of character development happening in that scene. And just as a composition, I think it's a beautiful sequence. Like, there's this really beautiful, shot of like the sun setting and different kinds of characters standing outside having conversations, which doesn't look normal, but it looks right. And that sequence, that whole, what the story does at that point in the film, I think really works well. And that's one of the standout sequences that I really enjoyed in the movie.
What about you, Ronald? Did you have any like standout moments or sequences that you would point to as among the best?
Yeah, I think I was trying to figure out if I liked any of the space stuff, any of the space battle stuff. And was I mentally prepared for not knowing anything about where this would take place in the trailer, and then kind of being plopped into this world suddenly in the first 10 minutes? I did like, she was a likable character, man. I mean, for some of the blandness of her performance on occasion, I'm not saying her, but whatever the script called for, whatever it called for, because I don't think it was Bree's fault.
Well, I mean, it called for her to be like a blank slate who doesn't remember her past, and I do think she's trying to play that. And I wonder, I mean, how would I play that? I don't know. How would you guys play that? How would you be a blank slate who has little flashes of memory? Well, and also you're wearing like a rubber suit. You know what I mean? You're wearing like a rubber bodysuit, and you're trying to know how to stand.
Yeah, and it's that, and like there's like a whole fish out of water element to it that she's got to also balance.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree with what you're saying, Ronald.
I enjoyed a lot of it. I unfortunately there's no. God, I sound like I don't like the movie. That there's nothing I can think of right now. That's the first 15 to 20 minutes.
Right?
Yeah, that's the problem. The first 15 or 20 minutes felt like Terminator 2 in a good way. I know that sounds weird. There were parts that felt very much like Terminator 2. The chases, the car stuff, that felt very specifically Terminator 2, which I loved. But yeah, I don't know.
Which John, you still haven't seen that, right?
I still haven't seen Terminator 2.
Oh yeah, John, you've never seen.
Maybe that should be our next episode.
That
Seriously, man.
We need to make that happen. Yeah. No, I know what you're saying, Ronald. It's interesting because, like, it is. The beginning of it did. I kind of was tapping into that kind of feeling too for the first like 15, 20 minutes of the movie. But yeah, I don't know. The challenge to really call out like a super memorable scene is. I mean, they're there, but I don't know that like they are something that I'm just like overflowing to talk about, or like I just can't wait to talk more about this or that.
Right.
I did really love Ben Mendelsohn in the movie. I thought he was great as Talos, the leader of the Skrulls. But I kind of love him in everything he does. But I feel like he does a lot in the movie in terms of like just body gestures, because being behind like an alien mask or makeup or whatever. You don't really see Ben Mendelsohn. You hear him and you like kind of know it's him, but there's a lot of gesturing and just body language and some physical beats and physical comedy happening that I think he's really great, and he's kind of like a standout character in the film.
Yeah, I would agree. I thought that character got to be an interesting entry in the Marvel canon of villains, because we've talked a lot about like what are the villains and what do they represent, and what's the difference between a villain and kind of just an antagonist, because some of these movies have had characters who are a little more sympathetic, and there is something strangely sympathetic about this odd transforming shape-shifting alien that I do think it sounds like Ben Mendelsohn having a blast. Maybe I'm wrong, but
sure.
It seems like he's really enjoying it, and he even gets to do a little shape-shifting into himself, and then later commenting on his beautiful blue eyes. I thought that was a fun little bit of I don't know if that was winking at Ben Mendelsohn or if that was just the idea of these shape-shifting aliens kind of fetishizing humanity and the things that they can transform into. But either way, it worked on a couple of levels, and that had like unexpected charm to it. I expected that villain to be like, I mean, I would have been not surprised at all if he had come off like Christopher Eccleston as the Dark Elf in Thor: The Dark World. You know what I mean? If he had just been a guy with latex who goes ha and then gets killed, like I wouldn't have been surprised. But no, and it had I thought that the fun. I thought it was fun seeing how much Nick Fury liked cats. That was a fun. Like it added to his character in this strange way to say that okay, before all this stuff started to go down, he was a very lighthearted fella who really loved a kitty cat.
Yeah, it was kind of cool too, like how they managed to kind of work in like a pseudo origin story for Nick Fury too, like along the way.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool.
Which for me to give that compliment, like I kind of feel like I'm burned out on Sam Jackson in general, but I mean I feel like it worked in this film, and I mean like what you just said, John. I feel like seeing like the lighter touch to what Nick was before all this comes up and becomes what it is, I think all that worked. I mean I thought that was pretty good as well.
I think next time you see him, it's going to be shaded by this, and I think that's kind of interesting.
Definitely.
So yeah, I guess we're all sort of mixed positive on this. I mean, where do you slot it in with the Marvel movies? Do you think it's just kind of middle of the pack, or do you think it's like where do you? I mean, we don't have to think of a numerical rating. That would be hard to do that, but
I would probably say, I mean, for me, it's probably in the middle, slightly above the middle. Like I don't, I think it doesn't. Like I say that it felt generic because of my expectation, but I understand its importance, and I think it some of the stuff happening in it works better than the best stuff in some of the worst of the Marvel films, if that makes sense. So,
Oh, absolutely.
I don't think that it falls like in the middle or below the middle. At the worst, it's the middle for me. I mean, I think like it's slightly above that, and probably on a rewatch, I think it might improve in my opinion. Just because I'll be able to kind of go see it again as it is, a standalone, have my expectations reset and everything. So, yeah, I mean, it's no Thor: Dark World or anywhere down that line for me. It's definitely in the middle of the pack, if not a little higher, for sure.
Middle of the road, I'd say better than Iron Man 2 and 3. So a little above middle of the road for me. Yeah, it was good. I mean, I enjoyed it. It feels a little messy, but I think there was a point in this whole Marvel thing that there would be some signs of that sort of thing, and it's kind of neat that despite there being signs of messiness, that their messiest task wound up being not that bad of a movie.
Right.
It's pretty cool. It's a feat.
Yeah.
I think you're right, Steve, that the highs are higher and the lows are maybe lower than some of the more mediocre to poor efforts that have been in this franchise. I think that is what makes it. I'm the same as you guys, kind of above average, slightly above the middle.
Yeah.
I think it is that the high moments are genuinely interesting, and that the character relationships are genuinely interesting, and that makes the stuff that's kind of clunky and that just sort of, you could argue, doesn't work. That stuff, you can kind of ignore it, at least in terms of overall what the movie's trying to do. But I think the big question is just, how is that character going to be used when she pops up again? And is it going to feel like, as you've said, Ron, is it going to be Samson taking over the whole Chipmunk band? We don't want that to happen.
Yeah, man.
The only, I guess this would be a good point for people to stop listening if they don't want to hear a little spoiler, but there's only one thing I really want to talk to you guys about in terms of that. If you guys are ready to move on, I think I can move on to that.
Sure.
Well, I mean, I guess there's the general ending of the movie, which has her going off with the Skrull warriors, who we now realize were, fighting for their own right to live, sort of, instead of being these evil invaders, and she's kind of repaying the debt to them. And so it ends with her going off into space, and all these characters from Guardians are still sort of out there, so she could have this whole thing going on. But they show us in the post-credits scene that she does pop up in a flash when she hears the message from Nick Fury, or she receives the page from Nick Fury that we saw in the post-credits scene of Infinity War. And I just wondered what you guys thought of that post-credits scene. I mean, did you get a little excited, feeling like you were getting a taste of Endgame there? And were you intrigued by seeing the way Captain Marvel kind of popped up, or did you think like, oh, there she is? Did you get that tingly feeling that they wanted you to get, I guess?
I did, actually. I mean, I gotta say, even feeling like, kind of middle mixed positive on it, I thought it was pretty cool, man. Like, I thought it was really cool to kind of just get a flash of her with those characters that I care so much about. And, like, just in that moment, which it's funny that we're saying, because I think Ronald left before the sequence even started. Did you see it, Ronald? Yeah, the mid-credit sequence.
There were two scenes. Yeah. Do you know about them? Do you know what they were?
I saw that somebody posted something online about it, but I didn't see it yet. Tell me. I mean, you can tell me.
Yeah, I mean, basically, the mid-credit sequence is basically, it shows, like, Captain America, Natasha, who else is there? Bruce Banner, Rhodey's there. Basically, they have, like, the pager, Nick Fury's pager, like, hooked up to, like, a battery that, like, is never, so that it will never die, and they're just basically waiting for a response. And the pager dies, and they bring that to his attention, to Captain America and Natasha's attention, and like they're just like, do whatever it takes, reboot it, let me know as soon as it comes back on. And then she turns around and Captain Marvel is like there. And
oh, wow.
It just cuts right there, and it's like Captain Marvel will return in Avengers Endgame. I'm not gonna lie to you, like I got goosebumps a little bit when it cut to black, and I'm just like, oh yeah, it's like that moment of just
not long now,
just seeing characters together, man. We got like a month and a half. It's like crazy. It's crazy.
The reason I asked is because I did get that little ooh.
Yeah, me too.
The best of those post-credit scenes will do that.
Have you noticed post seeing this filming, and people were like saying this online anyway, but like the same way they did with Infinity War, like, digitally adding or removing people from the sequences, like to kind of mislead us. But there's a couple of sequences in the Endgame trailer where there is like odd spacing between characters where you can tell that they've like removed someone. And now it kind of makes sense that like the person removed from these shots is Captain Marvel. And
makes sense.
There's a sequence in the Endgame trailer where you see those that are left kind of like walking through like an abandoned garage, like in a line.
Yeah.
And there's like a space between, like, I think it's between like Rocket and maybe Hawkeye or something. And it's a weird gap. Like there's no gap. Like there shouldn't be a gap. Like you're all walking in a line. And a lot of stuff is coming up now saying like that they've removed her from all these trailers, so that you didn't see her with that crew until you see this post-credit sequence. Which is cool. I mean, that's like they're good at that shit, man. They completely misdirect it with the, that running sequence from the Infinity War trailer, and I don't know, like the whole like team up shot or the hero shot from that trailer. But yeah, man, I'm like, I'm all in. You guys know I'm like super pumped. I can't wait. And It's amazing. I mean, regardless of what you think about, Marvel films in general, or if how you're saying, like, we kind of like we're in on this like long form television series that's happening on the big screen. It's just they do. I think overall, like, it's just unmatched. I mean, I think that they've done such an amazing thing, and I'm curious what happens after Endgame. But I mean, we were talking on a text thread a little while ago on our Facebook thread. It was like, I think I had sent like a Twitter post or something to you guys, like, it was like the anticipation for Endgame versus episode 9, and just what they've managed to do with the MCU. It's kind of crazy to me that when we were talking about that, it's like, I mean, I kind of feel like you're saying, like, I say out loud, like, it's got to be Endgame for me. And like listening to the two of us or the three of us talk about that, like, in like the fact that myself and I think John, like, we're like wrestling with like, which one are you more excited for? I feel it's just like a testament to what they've been able to do, to arguably sort of like dethrone Star Wars from being the franchise that it had always being that franchise that had overshadowed everything in its wake. And
right, that the whole culture is waiting to see what happens with
exactly it's kind of wild.
It is.
So I think overall we're all, I mean, I know people may have dipped out if they didn't want to hear that spoiler, but we all kind of noted it already. But I think it's definitely a go ahead. I mean, you got to see this movie in theaters, you got to experience it on the big screen.
Totally.
Definitely go see Captain Marvel if you were on the fence about it. But once you do see it, let us know what you thought of it. You can comment on this post if you're listening to this on the Facebook feed or on the YouTube, or even if you downloaded it through your favorite podcast platform. Find us on Facebook and comment. Let us know what you thought of the movie. If are we on? Are we way off? And who's completely blown away by the movie? Let us know who that is and why you love it or why you have issues with it, because we'd love to have that conversation. And it seems like that's probably one of the better platforms to have it on. It seems pretty interactive there, and pretty easy there. So if you want to find that post on Facebook.com/movie-schmovie, we'd love to hear from you. And
what's great about that is if you post on that as a listener, you can get responses from all three of us as movie schmovie, and you won't know which one of us sent you a response or gave you a like.
Intentionally,
and we'll alternate.
Sign it.
Yeah, we'll switch it up.
We won't sign it, so it'll be completely a mystery.
We'll switch it up like a couple of sneaky twins in an old Disney movie.
Oh man, good stuff. Well,
right.
That's it, guys. Great.
Thus ends the story of Samson the Chipmunk.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. That would be a good conversation point on the Facebook thread. Like, does this hold? What do you guys think? Is it accurate? What's Ronald's theory? How well does it play for you guys? That'd be good.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll be back in a couple weeks with. I'm not sure what we're going to talk about. Maybe we'll finally see Terminator 2 with John. I don't know. Maybe.
Right.
Maybe not.
You know what I actually would like to talk about with you guys? I want to talk about all the creepy documentaries about parents who don't know what they're doing,
that'd be
like
amazing.
Abducted in Plain Sight and Leaving Neverland. I would like to talk those things with you guys. Does that sound too grim?
Oh,
we can definitely do
yeah.
that. HBO.
So we'll do Terminator 2, Leaving Neverland, and Abducted in Plain Sight in the next movie schmovie.
What an episode!
What an episode!
Well, if you want to find past episodes, you can find Movie Schmovie on your podcast platform of choice: Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify. We should be there. If we're not, let us know, and we'll find our way there. But if you subscribe to us, we thank you for that. And if you don't, please go ahead and subscribe and leave us a comment or a rating or a review. Anything like that always helps, and it's appreciated.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And so thanks for listening to Movie Schmovie. We didn't say it, this is episode 233. That's what comes after 232. So just make sure you guys knew that in case you lost count. That's where we're at. And thanks for listening. And as always, you've made our day. Thanks.
Bye.